Check one, two. There we go. This is a, let's see. Hello? Hello? There we go. All right, this is a quick announcement. We may be just a few minutes delayed starting. The chairman of the subcommittee, Brad Thomas, and several other members of our committee are on transportation. They had to have a simple majority in their meeting so they could pass committee rules, and they're headed straight over here. So if y'all bear with us just a few moments, thank you.
Has everybody, hold on a minute. Their technology. And just to make sure anybody that wants to sign up to speak, we're going to take the sign up sheet here in just a second. So this is your chance. We got, okay, everybody wants to talk about 140, so I don't know. We got 244. Okay. All right, good morning or good afternoon. Feels like morning. We're here to go ahead and call the order of the State and Local Government Subcommittee. And we'll start off with our prayer. So Representative Lumpson has been kind enough to volunteer to do that. I'll turn it over to you.
Bow with me. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love and your goodness to us and for watching over us and caring for us. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity that you've given to each of us to serve our fellow citizens in this way. We just pray that you would give us your wisdom, give us your guidance so that the decisions we make might be beneficial for folks in our state and everybody concerned. So we just pray these things in Jesus' name for his sake. Amen.
Amen. All right. So we have 3 bills on the agenda today. HB 140, which is by Representative Gullett. HB 244, which we'll be hearing first, Representative Cannon, and then SB 16, and that'd be Senator Brass. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the mic to you. Okay, that one works. First time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I have HB 244, LC number 473293. Quick overview, HB 244 would require the state auditor to grant a 90-day extension after receiving an affidavit from a local government's auditor providing good cause that the local government is unable to complete their audit through no fault of their own. And while doing so, it would protect the local government from against losing state grants during this 90-day extension period. But this is a recommendation that came out of the Rural Development Council in both 2023 and 2024, and was one of their top priority policy recommendations. As you may know, Georgia Code requires local governments to submit financial reports annually within 180 days of year end. And just a little stat here, the number of local governments that fail to submit is increasing each year. In 2018, a little dated, but only 52% of cities met the statutory deadline. As of 2022, roughly 33% of cities filed their audits on time. Over the past 5 years, local governments that file late or do not file at all do so for a variety of reasons, such as not being prepared for an audit, difficulty hiring an auditor backlogs, turnover of city or county management or financial staff, and sometimes, I know the sheriff's folks are here, but non-compliance from constitutional officers. or state organizations that must submit auditing figures along with the local government's audit. As you know, failure to timely submit an audit to DOAA results in the loss of qualified local government status, and along with that, the eligibility to receive state funding. Those state funds are really critical to local governments, especially those in rural areas such as LMIG and LRA and CDBG dollars. Again, those are essential to local governments and are critical to add to their general fund or SPLOST or T-SPLOST, whatever revenues they have. But with this 90-day extension granted by DOAA, this would allow these smaller local governments to remain eligible for these critical state grants while continuing to work on completing their required audit. And in my experience in local government, I can tell you that this is an issue from time to time for even a larger county like ours. Sometimes we're waiting on the library or the Department of Public Health, or in our case, a couple of years ago, the clerk of the court. So it is an issue. And if you don't have your audits submitted in time, not to mention trying to find an audit firm, they're becoming harder and harder to find. The county or city has to go through the procurement process, which can be difficult, take a long time. But they're harder and harder to find, and there's less and less auditing firms that are doing this kind of work, government work especially. So it is a challenge to try and find these auditing firms. But in summary, HB 244 would allow counties an extension and cities on maintaining their qualified local government status and completing their audits if the auditor signs and submits an affidavit stating that the delay is due to no fault of their own. I think this is a reasonable allowance for our smaller local governments, and it strikes a balance between fulfilling their obligations to their citizens and taxpayers for transparency, while also allowing them to remain eligible for what can be really critical state funding. I'll stand in for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're open for questions. We have one question. Representative Williams.
Yeah, Representative Williams from Marietta Cobb. So I've heard in the past, particular Chairman Lynn Smith talk about some of the struggles of the smaller counties and dealing with things like audits and other responsibilities. And I don't have a problem at all with an extension, but it seems like there's something else kind of more at the heart of this. Is there any source of relief from community affairs or anybody else to actually provide some kind of assistance to these smaller counties in this, who are struggling with this? Because you can give them 180 days, but they still have the problem of can't find auditors and being, a small county or whatever.
I've heard those issues, and it is a struggle even for a larger county, but there was a bill, I think, to try to consolidate some leadership for some counties, county manager especially. That could be an option, but the leadership challenge in these smaller cities is difficult. They don't have enough to pay them to recruit them. The audit, a single audit is now around $8,000 to complete. That's expensive. Auditing for the regular books is around $50,000. So these are expensive, the burdens on smaller governments. So I don't know of anything specifically DCH does. There's a lot of state funding, but if they're not in compliance, they're not eligible for DCH or community affairs funding or LMIG or LRA. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. They have to get compliant with their audits and their taxpayers and transparency and all that. But if they're not and they're struggling, then they're not eligible. So I understand the concern, and we'll dig more into it.
With that, I don't see any more questions. We'll go ahead and bring up Dante and Jim Thornton with ACCG GMA to testify for the bill. Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Chairman Thomas, members of the committee. Dante Handel with ACCG, joined by Jim Thornton with GMA. Wanted to express ACCG's full support for this measure. Thank you very much to Representative Cannon for bringing the legislation. This is really aimed at protecting local governments' funding, and especially for those local governments that are smaller and may have more difficulty attracting an auditor or having the staff to pay for that audit. And then given the importance of infrastructure fund and items like that, those LMIG and LRA dollars are going to continue to be crucial for those local governments, especially in the rural areas. So I'd be glad to answer any questions from the committee.
All right, have any questions? I've just got one, and
Yes, sir.
it's been weighing in the back of my mind. If we push the day 90 days, does that make a difference? Like, I mean, if they can't meet the date now, if we push it 90 days, does that mean in 2 years you're going to come back and ask for another 90 days? Could you kind of clarify that for me real quick? How this helps?
I appreciate the question. So the important part about that 90-day extension is that there's a hold harmless clause in there where those local governments do not fall out of compliance. And that's especially important for the counties where we do have some issues with our constitutional officers in that they're elected independently of the county commission. We don't have control over them or how they respond to these audit requests. And we have had a couple examples where we've fallen out of compliance due to a disconnect there.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to see if we can clarify that a little bit.
Yes, sir.
I have no questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jim Thornton with GMA, and I would echo Dante in support for this bill that Representative Cannon has brought. This is an issue that has received a lot of conversation. Obviously, the Rural Development Council has talked about it. The state auditors created a working group last fall. Actually, we hosted that meeting of the working group at GMA headquarters. Dante and I both served on that panel along with a number of audit professionals who do this work, as well as city and county officials from across the state. And there are a myriad of challenges that particularly our smaller cities in rural Georgia face, as well as smaller counties in complying with the audit requirements. Sometimes that is their fault, but sometimes it's beyond their control. The availability of auditors is a real issue in South Georgia. This work is not particularly lucrative sometimes, and so it's a challenge to get audit firms to want to go and spend a few weeks in a small town in South Georgia to conduct an audit. So it's hard to find the auditors. And then some of the changes that have been made at the federal level with some of the Dodd-Frank legislation and some of the other financial legislation has actually disqualified a lot of local accounting firms that normally are who our smaller cities relied upon. The firm in the big city next door would come and do the work, but if they have some type of relationship, that disqualifies them. So there are a whole myriad of reasons why cities and counties have had difficulty meeting the requirement. The state auditor has worked with us closely on that, and I think there may be some other technical audit changes that may be coming before you at some point in the future. But we feel like this is a good provision to just give those communities who have an issue that's not their fault an extra window of opportunity. So GMA supports the bill, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I think you used the key word, not their fault. So I think that's a big one. In that case, I'll open up for questions. Seeing none, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
That covers all of our people that want to speak in for or against this particular bill. At this point, I'll open up the floor for a motion. You pass. A second, okay. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, measure passes. Thank you, Representative Cannon. That's fine. Do you want to do it here? Come up here? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so next on the list, Chairman Anderson has offered to present SB 16. And so you're 15. All right, that's all yours, Chairman Anderson.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill, our first one from the Senate. I emphasize from the Senate. So thank you to Chairman Brass for entrusting us with this bill. It's actually a bill that's very timely for his district and his area. And so I wanted to just kind of briefly go over what the scenario is here. There is a provision in law that's enumerated here in this bill in Title 45, which prohibits people in the bail bonds business from holding local public office in certain circumstances. And that has caused an issue with a local candidate who was initially elected and then challenged and had to step down. Now there's a special election coming up. This person's family is in the bail bonds business. However, they do not operate the business in the jurisdiction where she lives and would serve. It's actually in a different jurisdiction, not completely uninvolved with her official position, should she get reelected for that position now. And so this change, basically, the bulk of it is starting on line 16. It shall be unlawful for any person who is a member of the governing authority of a county, municipal corporation, or consolidated government to engage either directly or indirectly in the bail bond business within the jurisdiction of the county, municipal, or corporation, or consolidated government where such person holds office. So that's this is just further specifying that and narrowing the that restriction down so that it corresponds to the jurisdiction where that office is held. And again, just bringing this on behalf of Senator Brass. Okay.
Well, hey,
I
Chip,
just walked in the door.
hey, shipmate,
Yes,
we
sir.
we just
Please.
finished. You gave the best presentation I've ever seen you give. I think Chairman Anderson, he just
I
presented
very
it for you.
briefly went over the content and context of the bill for you, sir.
Okay.
And so if anything you want to add, we just basically read over line 16 through 19, which is, I think, the crux of what you're trying to do there.
Absolutely. And I want to be very transparent on why the need for this bill. We did have a local election, and a lady that she won and got to her training for ACCG as a county commissioner, and that's when the law was brought to her attention. And so therefore she didn't want to be sworn in because she'd be committing a misdemeanor. So they had to declare a vacancy and have issued a special election, and she did requalify in hopes that this bill would pass. And I have been very transparent on this throughout the process on why we're doing it. I have it crafted to where any conflict of interest is eliminated. And, I think, to me, when you get into some of these rural counties, the bench can be limited just because the population is limited of folks that are willing to run for office. And, there was already a carve out there for school board. And so I thought it'd be appropriate to add for county commission or city council or consolidated government. And with the caveat that you cannot issue bonds in that district. So, or I'm sorry, in that county. So that's the purpose. To be very clear, I'm not weighing in on the election. I'm not doing this specifically for her, but I am doing it specifically for this situation. And because I do think it's I don't know how long this law's been around and not sure why it's there, but it's there and I'm just trying to fix it. That's it.
All right.
You probably did a better job presenting than I did.
Well, that's what I was saying is best presentation I ever saw you give.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take it.
Questions? All right, we have one question. Just a second. Representative Sanchez.
Hi, Chairman. Thank you so much for bringing this bill forward. So I just had a quick question. You said that, the conflicts of interest are accounted for in this bill. One of the concerns I was looking at is even if they are not, issuing bonds within the municipality that they govern, is it possible that they can issue bonds in other neighboring governing authorities that could still impact their residents if the said residents that they represent do bonds in that neighboring county where they issue bonds?
Yeah, so they could. I got a similar question. I think it's in line with your question in the Senate, where, do you think they could use their influence in said county in a neighboring county? Is that kind of what your question is, or?
Yeah, it's is it even if they're not?
Or you're saying for constituents?
Yeah,
Their
if a
I
yeah.
understand.
Mhm.
So where the conflict could lie, I think that's what we got to understand is that sheriffs all sheriffs, they are who approve the bail bondsman.
Mhm.
And with the county commissioner has control of the budget of the sheriff's department. Right. And so that's where the conflict would lie, not necessarily with an individual constituent.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And see no other questions. This time I entertain a motion. Second, all in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Okay, congratulations, Chairman Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion passes.
Appreciate y'all. And
See you
thank you for
tomorrow.
waiting on me. Sorry I was late.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Senator Brass, you'll be in full committee tomorrow.
Thank you.
You don't have to get on the mic for
I kind of like it.
that.
3:00.
You're welcome to
We'll
hang.
be there. And Representative Huddleston, who represents Heard County with me, will be carrying the bill.
Okay,
So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Dolan's on the way over. With you in 50 minutes. All right, so yeah, we're gonna stand at ease here just for a couple minutes. We're waiting for Representative Gollett. He's on the way over. He just texted me. So, well, there we go. Well, that was a short recess. Yeah. All righty. Well, Representative our Chairman Gollett, it's all you, sir.
You members, House Bill 140 is a substitute from what we had initially dropped. But essentially what it does is we have a number of cities in the state who are abusing the ticketing process. And it's not about tickets. It's not about someone breaking the law. I think that's completely within the bounds of what they're writing tickets for. But they are using tickets and fines to fund their government. And that's where this bill steps in to address it. So what this bill does is it says no city, no municipality can raise more than 10% of their entire city budget or through criminal and civil fines. Most cities this shouldn't apply to, but there are a number of cities who really do completely fund their government through tickets. And the reason that cities are important to this is because cities have the ability to annex. So they can grow. They can move. Counties, they're pretty stationary. Sheriffs are elected. Police chiefs are not. And so when cities are annexing in, especially in the interstate areas, oftentimes it's not just about public safety. They didn't represent that area before. Oftentimes it really is about generating revenue to fund their governments. And so what this bill does is just says 10% is the cap that a city can bring for fines, both criminal and civil, based on their city budget. And after the 10%, it comes to the state. And that's something I'm looking to address. I need some smart minds to help us figure out where that money goes. The state doesn't need the money. It's not about the state getting the money. Where do we put that money so that it benefits the cities who are doing the right thing? It benefits public safety, but it doesn't allow cities to just continue to write tickets where it's not about public safety, where it's about revenue. Because ultimately, I served on a nonprofit before I was elected that supported public safety. It's called Paulding Public Safety Appreciation. And my goal was to get a community buy-in into public safety, where the community and the public safety, whether it's law enforcement or police, law enforcement, fire departments, we had marshals involved in there, but where there's a relationship and there's a lot of trust that's built there. And so that's really what I want. I don't want people to feel, I think people do feel like certain towns, where they got pulled over, it's not because they were speeding, but it's because that town is using it as revenue generation. And so that's what this bill does. I'm happy to answer any questions about it. I think it's pretty simple, but happy to answer any questions.
You actually have a couple questions here. Representative Williams.
I did read the handout, which is really helpful. Thank you. How many cities do you think this is going to impact? I mean, how many cities are currently funding over 10% of their revenue through citations or tickets.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I do know.
Ballpark.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean-
Honestly, we're gonna find out. I've asked GMA to come up with some numbers on how many cities they believe this affects. But ultimately, this is not a new idea. 10% was really something that Alabama just recently did. They were having a problem with taxation through citation in Alabama, and they came up with a 10%. That's kind of where we started here. But as you look at the numbers and the phone calls I've received, it's really not. I did the cities in my area, and they didn't qualify for it. I think larger cities are going to be difficult. Smaller cities, it might be, I might get them more. It's just going to depend on what they bring in for revenue and the tax base they have there.
I just would like to know, which municipalities are affected. Thank you.
I think you'll hear about them
I
today.
think so too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this bill. Just a quick question. It's just because I'm not familiar with how this would normally be handled. On line 28, you mentioned that in addressing that 10%, you mentioned that it also, or as a result of a criminal or civil forfeiture action.
Sure.
Aside from face value of cash forfeiture, if it is property forfeiture, is there an evaluation method to determine how that would fit into the 10%?
That I don't know. That's kind of a legislative council question, I think. But I think that ultimately my goal was to capture a number of civil penalties, as we know, like throughout the state. Not everything, just because you do something that we deem as illegal, depends on how you're caught, whether it's criminal or civil. So a red light camera, for instance, is a civil matter. A speed camera is a civil action. It's not a criminal. So you're speeding, which is really breaking the law, but because of the confrontation clause, where an officer is not actually confronting you about it, it becomes a civil thing. So that's what we're trying to capture in that too, as far as the 10%. So it's less about civil asset forfeiture, although it's included. That's kind of I hope that cities aren't, funding their government based on, hey, I hope that, we get some civil, the drug dealers coming through my area and we capture that. And I really hope that cities just aren't funding their government through, through fines and in general, but I don't know the calculation of that. Great question.
Thank you.
I can find out.
I think I got a quick answer for how many cities are doing it. It'd be all the ones I get a phone call from after that's the bill today.
Right.
So
It's not too many. It's not like, we have 400 something cities. It's nowhere near most. How about that?
yeah. All right. Perfect. Well, we have several that want to testify or against this bill. So we'll go ahead and start working through the top. Ray, and forgive me, Ray Calpani, GDPI.
Yes, thank you. You got it right. So
Thank you.
process. I appreciate it. Yes, I'm Ray Califani. I'm with the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today in support of this bill. As GDPI, we believe that HB 140 serves as a critical step towards the elimination of excessive fines and fees that distort justice and perpetuate poverty. For those who aren't already familiar, Georgia is one of the worst states in the country in terms of the concentration of cities that rely on fines and fees to cover at least 10% or more of their local budgets. And to answer the question, in the research that we've done, particularly for 2022, about 77 cities had fines and fees that were 10% or above in terms of excessive reliance. So this excessive reliance is all too often due to economically strapped cities that don't have many alternative options in raising revenue. And for that reason, the policy considerations within this bill or adjacent to it, we hope should include renewed conversations on more proactive revenue sources, or at least those that don't place the same level of disproportionate burden on Georgians who earn the lowest incomes. This may include a renewed conversation around expanding the application of the sales tax so that there would not be an increase in the rate of the sales tax, but rather an expansion of the base of the population that contributes to it. Also, just thinking about, how people are affected in this, in terms of how fines and fees in Georgia have disproportionately impacted those who earn the least. based on our research, and just looking at the data over the last 7 years, so that's from 2016 to 2023, rising court fine and fee revenue in cities drove the average per capita cost from $78.90 to about $105. So that's an increase of about 33% from 2016 to 2023 in per person cost. I mean, just compare that to Georgians who earn incomes at the bottom of the income ladder, right? And the buying power of their wages only grew by an average of 15%, right? And this accounts for inflation. Last, I'll say that, excessive fines and fees can be a gateway to criminal legal system entanglement for economically strapped Georgians. Those who cannot afford to promptly pay fines and fees for minor offenses like traffic tickets can be placed on probation. And in Georgia, where for-profit probation is allowed to thrive, that can mean even deeper debt, deeper poverty, and even long-term entanglement in Georgia's criminal legal system. So I thank you, and I yield my time back.
Perfect. Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. DJ Waller, GMA, you're next. Come on down.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm DJ Waller with Georgia Municipal Association. Good to see y'all again. We work with all 537 of Georgia cities. Let me begin by saying that we at GMA support the goals of Representative Gullett has shared regarding this legislation. Thank you for meeting with us. We agree that cities should not be dependent on criminal fine revenue to sustain their operations. However, we also recognize that fine revenue collected from people who have violated the law has been historically used to help offset the cost of providing public safety services that are in high demand, highly valued, and increasingly expensive for cities and counties to deliver. With that in mind, and to address the issue without creating new challenges for cities or their residents who may see their property taxes increase to pay for the services or challenges for public safety personnel, we like to propose a few adjustments to the bill. First, we would be remiss if we did not remind this body that in 2021, legislation was enacted which prohibits local governments from decreasing the annual budgetary appropriation of their police force by more than 5% from the previous fiscal year's appropriation of such police force. While the 2021 legislation has a carve out if the anticipated revenues of a local government decrease by more than 5%, the local government would still be prohibited from decreasing the law enforcement budget by any greater percentage than the overall percentage. Unfortunately, for some of the small local governments, which are heavily reliant on fine and forfeitures, the result would be a defunding of the police, perhaps to such an extent that these local government agencies could no longer function. This result will also put these local governments in direct conflict with legislation enacted just 4 years ago. To reduce the number of jurisdictions which will be put in the legislative conundrum, we believe the percentage gap should be increased from 10% to 25% of the total budget of local government. While we agree that no city or county should derive a significant portion of its revenue from fines and fees, we think that 10% could be too low, particularly for smaller cities where police force is the primary function of local government, and those funds are utilized to pay for law enforcement needs of the community. Public safety is the first and most important responsibility of local government. When you call 911 in a city, it's typically the city's police department that responds. Smaller cities often have fewer responsibilities compared to larger cities, which may operate utilities, recreation programs, zoning departments, and other services. For smaller cities, policing takes up a substantial portion of both the budget and the day-to-day activities. We believe this 25% amount suggested will still address the problem of capturing those bad actors and preventing over-reliance of fines, while also allowing more flexibility, particularly for the smaller cities, as mentioned. Second, the line about forfeitures, we recommend removing forfeitures from the bill. We understand that the concern about cities relying on forfeiture funds. However, forfeitures are not typically a consistent or predictable part of law enforcement funding. They tend to occur in isolated, high-value cases, most often involving large drug seizures or cash confiscation. These large forfeitures don't happen frequently, but when they do, they often occur along busy interstate corridors and can involve significant sums. A smaller city, through either good police work or luck, might seize a large quantity of drugs and cash in one incident, creating a one-time windfall. Including the forfeiture in the calculation could disproportionately and unfairly impact the city's budget. Additionally, state and federal laws already impose strict rules on how forfeit funds can be used. They typically cannot be applied to general operating expenses, can't pay for salaries. Instead, they're often earmarked for capital projects or other specific purposes. For these reasons, we believe it should be removed from this bill. Next, we would like to address what you brought up about where the money should go, and we talked about this. I propose directing those excess funds to the State Criminal Justice Coordinator Council, CJCC, for any purpose authorized under the chapter, which includes research, training, provision of law enforcement grants, as well as funding for immigration enforcement incentive programs. So for those of you who may not know, CJCC have been in place for decades and serves as a conduit for state and federal funding, which is distributes to local law enforcement agencies primarily through grant program. By directing these excess funds, revenue to CJCC, the funds will remain dedicated to public safety, including immigration enforcement, while being redistributed to law enforcement agencies across the state to hear their best practices. We think this is a win-win for everyone. Lastly, because these changes could significantly impact local government budgets and those jurisdictions impacted will need to adjust accordingly, we would suggest that the application date be pushed at least to July 1, 2026, but preferably January 1st, 2027. We're willing to draft the language reflecting these recommendations if you're open to it. We thank you again for working with us. And thank you to the committee for listening to me talk for 5 minutes. I'll pause for any questions.
All right, well, you do have one. Representative Sanchez.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So a quick question. I do hear you about the need for funding public safety in these cities, but isn't part of the reason that these cities are expanding their public safety so much is to seek more revenue from these tickets and fines in order to then, create more revenue for their budgets? So isn't that like a catch-22 where like if they can't do that anymore, they won't have the need for that public safety anymore?
Thank you for that question. My response to that, I would hope not. We don't advocate for cities to do revenue-based policing. That's not what we're in for. We're actually here for public safety. So thank you for that. And to the comment about how many cities, we actually got a report from DCA this morning from Chiefs Association. It's about 37 cities and 4 counties above that 10%. That's based on 2023 data. So thank you.
All right, you have no more questions. Thank you, DJ. I appreciate it. Up next is a fellow Cherokee County native, Scott Turner, and former representative in the House. Mic is all yours, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's always a pleasure to be in front of my favorite committee I ever served on. I see a couple of familiar faces, so many new ones. For those I didn't have the pleasure of serving with, one of my passions was civil asset forfeiture reform while I was here. I really believe that due process and the concept of innocent until proven guilty is an important one. And I would like to paint a little bit of a different picture than some of the folks who came before me about how civil asset forfeiture is used in Georgia. One of the things that's really important to know about civil asset forfeiture is it doesn't follow the criminal process. It's civil. Doesn't mean you have to, when you go in front of a jury, you're trying to prove your innocence or beyond a reasonable doubt. It's preponderance of the evidence. It's almost like a 50% plus one margin, to put it in layman's term. I'm not an attorney, but that's the way it's been explained to me. So it almost gets to a point where we think you have gotten this property through criminal activity. And so that civil process moves separately from your criminal process. If you are actually accused of a crime, your defense attorney is going to tell you to not defend your property because you don't have the right to remain silent in a civil process. And so it puts the cart before the horse. And for years, I tried to introduce legislation that would fix that and say you can't move to civil until after the criminal. And if you're found not guilty, you get your property back. But that's not the case in Georgia. Today, if a city or local law enforcement agency pulls somebody over on the side of the road, they are able to determine through various methods that they think that the car was stolen or the car was involved in a drug deal or there's an amount of cash. And what does that look like? The Institute for Justice releases a scorecard for every state. The most recent data they have from 2018, they give us a D-, almost failing. Because we're trying to do some right things. We have some reporting things that raise our score from an F. But that data shows that the median forfeiture in Georgia is $540. We're not talking about taking down major, huge criminal enterprises when half of the value is less than $540. Chairman Anderson asked the question earlier, how is it valued? Most of those, 58% of that is cash. So it's pretty easy to put a value on it. The others are put into the report in the database on the fair market value of the item. So if it's a car, it's worth $30,000. It's a $30,000 car, what it would fetch at auction, essentially. So to answer that question directly. So over the last decade, we've gotten some data from, well, let's go talk about 2000 to 2019. How much was actually forfeited? We're talking $439 million when you include the federal sharing program that many of our local law enforcement agencies participate in. $500 million. Now look, if we had this bill pass, it doesn't change how law enforcement does their job. I think that's really important, whether it's the civil asset forfeiture piece or it's enforcing the speed limit for fines. Today, if somebody is speeding, they get pulled or they're weaving or they look like they're drunk driving, police officer is going to pull that person over and they're going to assess that situation. And then they're going to take the appropriate action, whether it's a citation or an arrest or a warning, which is in their discretion. If this bill passes, that does not change. This does not change how law enforcement does their job. And that's really key important if you're concerned about public safety, as I am, that you understand that this is about fairness and also about due process and making sure that the people who are paying for that local government's budget are actually able to elect those individuals as well. So if there are any questions about the civil asset forfeiture piece, which I disagree with our former speaker, I think it's a vitally important part because it does something that will actually improve our grade in that Institute for Justice report card. It's removing the incentive to police for profit. And I'm not saying that our local enforcement officers engage in policing for profit at all. I want them to be able to enforce the law. I want them to make the drug bust, but I don't want them to just do it for the money. That should not be what they're doing it for. We're paying taxes. We all agree that we should be safe. We all agree that when people break the law, they should be punished, but doing it in a way that's actually fair and motivated by the right reasons, public safety. I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Okay. Seeing none, I actually have one question for you. The GMA spoke that saying that by making this measure, and I apologize if I didn't get this quite right, but I'm trying to get my head around it. By putting this measure in place, it could reduce funding, which triggers that 5% mechanism, which would cause a public safety issue. Was that kind of what you were addressing, Mr. Turner?
No, it wasn't. So that passed after I left, but not specifically, no. What I'm talking about is when the civil process is engaged, there you do not have the same rights in a civil process that you do in a criminal. So if, and this is happening with the speed camera debate right now, right? It's one of the main reasons why Representative Washburn's brought that particular piece of legislation is because you don't have the right, you're not confronted by a police officer in that situation. When you go to the civil process, in order for you to defend your property, because they don't bring charges against you in the civil process, they bring charges or the case against the property. So you see cases like using federal cases, United States government versus $1,432. That's an actual case. So they're actually taking action against the property under a much lower evidentiary standard. And that's where I think this is a responsible way. It's not perfect for civil asset forfeiture reformers, but it's definitely a move in the right direction because you're changing the incentives. You're changing the direction of the incentive.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you.
You actually have no more questions.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the list is M.L. Boone speaking in favor of the bill.
Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to speak. I am strongly in support of this bill. I just happen to be a regular citizen. I live, first of all, let me back up for a second. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I don't think, as I've searched my memory bank, I don't think I've ever supported a Republican bill until this. And so, Mr. Gullett, Representative Gullett, thank you for bringing this forward. I stand in strong support of it. I just happen to live in East Point, which unfortunately borders Hapeville. And I can tell you from personal experience that Hateville probably is at the top or near the top of this list when it comes to policing for profit. And ma'am, you asked, where are some of these cities or what are these cities? You have College Park engaging in this type of activity, Fairburn. You get on I-75 and just head south below Macon, and you will run into a host of policing for profit dragnets along I-75, straight down to the Florida line. So this is definitely a problem. And I, again, strongly support this and urge you guys to rein this in. If these cities and counties want to put a tax increase proposal before the citizens, let them do that. But they should not be allowed to use this backdoor taxing method to make victims out of the rest of us because they are too, scared to put this proposal before their voters. Let the voters decide. If they are so confident about this whole idea of public safety and the cost of doing business, then put the measure before the voters and put it before the voters and let them decide if this is something they want. But they have not done that, and I assume they're too afraid to do it. And when you talk about this whole issue of forfeiture, you can fly out of Hartsville, and if you just happen to look a certain way, I mean, they can just profile you and think you have something illegal, take you into a room and search you. If you happen to have a large quantity of cash, they can just take it. No due process, no court order, no criminal conviction. And in America that I call home, I don't think that's right. I don't think it's appropriate. It's not fair. And so I'm glad, again, that you're addressing this. Let me just throw out one other thing. You have these departments now, these policing agencies using these stealth vehicles, skirting another state law that requires them to have their patrol cars marked. So now what they're doing is that they have these patrol cars where the letters are the same color as the vehicle, and you can barely make out that it's a patrol car. And so if this is about public safety, why is it that they're now using these pseudo undercover vehicles to engage in this type of activity, to do these traffic stops and drum up cash essentially for struggling municipalities? And I feel sorry for these smaller towns that have a smaller tax base and they can't raise the money. I'm sorry for them. But if I'm driving through your city, I should not bear the cost of that. Regardless of whether I'm breaking the law, and I expect to get pulled over if I'm doing something wrong, but I mean, I don't want to get caught into a policing for profit dragnet. And let me just close on what that looks like in case you guys might have forgotten. We all remember Ferguson, Missouri, and what happened there and how that town was ripped apart due to riots and all the other stuff that happened as a result of the killing of Mike Brown. That all began because of policing for profit, because they had the town literally under siege by police department that every day their goal was to write as many tickets as possible. And you see what the result of that was. We don't want that to happen here in Georgia. So I strongly urge you guys to pass it. I would also urge you to reject all of the proposals by GMA. I mean, it's no surprise they would come in and want to change the bill in their favor. I strongly urge you to reject that, please. And so, again, thank you, Representative Gullett, and thank you all for listening. And I just hope moving forward that you would have a favorable view of the bill. So thank you again.
So just real quick, obviously don't agree with everything you had to say there, but I would say I'm glad that you're finally supporting a Republican bill. Hopefully we can get you to sign up for a couple more. Okay.
I don't know about a couple
we do some pretty good stuff over here.
I'm reasonable.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you. Okay. Our last two are going to be Zoom meetings. So I'm a little, you would think the guy in the technology committee would be the one that can handle this well, but I'm not. So, okay. Yeah. So, we have, Gary Charles and Vittoro, Nastasi with, Reason Foundation. If y'all want to go ahead and unmute yourself, we'll recognize you at this point.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Vittorio Nastasi, and I am Director of Criminal Justice Policy at the Reason Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to provide brief comments on House Bill 140. in addition to the written testimony that I have submitted for your review. Unlike existing laws in Georgia that regulate the use of speed detection devices, the bill in front of you today, the End Local Taxation by Citation Act, does not in any way directly prevent local police departments from enforcing speed limits or other traffic laws. Instead, this bill directly tries to sever any relationship between law enforcement priorities and the need for municipalities to raise revenue. And this is not a new issue in the state of Georgia. Over the past 60 years, the Georgia General Assembly has repeatedly adopted reforms with the intent of preventing local governments from engaging in enforcement activities for the purposes of raising revenue. In fact, between 1962 and 1968, the state even prohibited local law enforcement agencies from using speed detection devices altogether. The current framework was adopted in 1968, and it allows DPS to have some oversight over the issuing and potential revocation or suspension of permits to use speed detection devices on local roadways, and it's permitted by the roadway. And there are thresholds in statute that say that if a city is getting over 35% of the municipal police department's budget from speeding citations in particular, then there is a rebuttable presumption that the city is using speed detection devices to raise revenue. And so I just want to emphasize that since this law was adopted in 1968, preventing local governments from using speed enforcement to raise revenue has been the stated objective of this section of statute. However, there are some gaps in the current law. For example, only speeding citation revenue is counted toward that 35% threshold. And in effect, what this allows cities to do is issue citations for non-speeding violations. And in my written testimony, I've provided a couple examples of cities who are generating north of 70% of their budget, thousands of dollars or over $1,000 per resident from citations. And those revenues do not count toward the current DPS oversight threshold because they are issued for non-speeding violations. And so that's what this bill tries to do. One other strength that I would point to for this bill over the current framework is that the current framework would suspend a city's license to use speed detection devices if they run afoul of that 35% threshold. Whereas this bill just prevents them from the cities from retaining the revenue. It has no effect on law enforcement's ability to actually enforce speeding laws. A couple things I also want to mention. So the numbers that GMA provided of about 30 to 40 cities, those align with my understanding. The only caveat I would attach to that is that those are based on numbers from the DCA's report on local government finance, and not every city responds to that every year. So there might be some cities that aren't counted in that number. But it is a relatively small minority of cities that would run afoul of the 10% cap. It's also notable that only money over that 10% cap is what would be remitted to the state. And so generally we're talking about pretty small dollars. And if it's a situation where a city is just barely going over that threshold, it's only that small amount over the threshold that they would be losing. I also want to point out that it is explicitly the claim that cities could not operate without this fine revenue that is the reason for the bill and the cause of concern. In fact, in Utah, in just the last 2 years, there was a city mayor who made that very statement at a public meeting, and it led the state legislature to adopt a cap on fine revenue, very similar to in-House Bill 140. So, that is precisely the concern that the bill tries to address. And finally, speaking of Institute for Justice, which was mentioned by one of the previous speakers, Georgia actually is ranked as the worst performing state in terms of protections against municipal taxation by citation. And that's because the state generally has a very permissive framework where states or cities can create their own municipal courts. They have a lot of control in those processes, and so there's very little protection for residents from these kinds of revenue-seeking activities. And so again, that is what this bill tries to address, is just severing any monetary incentives that might exist aside from obviously the very legitimate public safety priorities of enforcing speeding laws. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Open for questions. Seeing none, thank you. I had Gary Charles on here as well. Gary, did you want to speak or are you good? I'm going to take it by a lack of unmute that you're good. Okay, all right. That concludes all our presenters. And at this point, do you have any final comments, Representative or Chairman Gollett? Okay.
Sure if I'm on, maybe I am. So I want to thank the presenters who presented this bill. I do want to focus on specifically what this bill does, though. One, it just caps cities, municipalities at 10% for fines of their entire budget. We do have a speeder bill, like a speed trap bill or a speed trap law from a number of years ago that said 35% of your police budget. You can't go over that. So police departments know that they don't write tickets for speeding. If you're speeding, you're moving too fast for conditions or some other violation to kind of get around that. So I know that's been brought up in the past to me, not so much today, but that we already have a bill for that. And this isn't about civil asset forfeiture as a whole. That practice is not something that's not a fight I'm trying to fight. What I'm trying to do is just make sure that cities are motivated about public safety. The reason you get a ticket is because of public safety. It's not for financial gain. And those 37 cities or 40 cities or so that are doing that, they know that they're bad actors. There have been a number of media reports in their locations, and 50% of your city budget goes towards writing a ticket. There's one town in Georgia for 3 years. They had one ticket that wasn't on the interstate. One city, 3 years, they only had one ticket that wasn't on the interstate. I believe that their radar license got pulled. So it's a privilege for each city to be able to run radar. Back, in times past, only state patrol ran radar. Sheriffs didn't run radar. County police didn't run radar. Cities didn't run radar. State patrol ran radar. And when a trooper pulls you over, that money goes to the locality that you're pulled over in. And I know that Chairman Lunston was a former trooper, but that money goes to where it's pulled over. So there's no incentive when the state patrol pulls you over. There's no financial incentive. And so it's a privilege. And so this city who's super reliant on fines and tickets, they get their radar pulled. What do they do? What do they do? If you got 50% of your budget or everybody even more than that coming from a ticket and you get your radar pulled, what do they do? There's other ways to pull people over, but primarily it's radar. I think you can, pay someone and do other things, but primarily it's radar. If we don't need cities that dependent on this to make their ends meet. That's just really important. I think that's just really a principle of how you fund your government. And so I'll take any questions, but appreciate y'all's time and consideration of this bill.
Seeing no questions, at this point, I'll open the floor for motion. We pass. Second. All right, we have all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right. Chairman Gollett, your measure passes. We'll see you in full committee tomorrow. All right. Thank you. Having no further bills or no further items to take action on, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.